Hi, I'm Don Lupo. I'm Director of Content and Marketing for ThinkLA, and I'm here with Jim Baudino from Mary Jane Media. Jim, would you want to go through a little bit about what it took to get this cannabis event going?
Sure. This has been in the works for 2 years, so I thought that this was something that was extremely important for the ThinkLA community to understand what's going on in the cannabis world, because it is impacting everyone in the advertising and marketing landscape.
You know, we've been talking with Jim for 2 years. We've been talking to people in the industry and in the city of Los Angeles. You know, this is going to be a $32 billion industry by 2020 across the country, and the legalization and I guess all the ins and outs of not just marketing this, but who pays for it and how. We want to make sure that our membership has all the information they need to prepare themselves for when that happens.
So just for a show of hands, how many of you are in the cannabis space currently? Wow, okay, all right. So how many of you want to be in the cannabis space? All right, okay, good to know. And so we can go to the presentation. So I just wanted to create a baseline for everyone here. So we can go to the first slide. You know, really, what is cannabis? I mean, if you think about it, this is where the education comes in. You know, and starting from square one, when I was transitioning from Toyota to Mary Jane, I did my research. You got to do your research. If you're not in the space, you want to get into it, you got to understand what it is, what cannabis is, and the history, and where we're going now, all of the laws. It's extremely important to understand where the industry is coming from, and who helped get it there. But really, this is from the Oxford Dictionary. And hemp, you know, a lot of people don't know that hemp is actually part of cannabis. And cannabis is a Schedule I drug, so it's illegal on a federal level. So if you look at the history, one interesting fact is that the Declaration of Independence was made on hemp. And farmers were forced to grow hemp to create ropes for the Navy. And so once you start learning about the industry and why things are the way they are, it's really interesting with the history. Next slide, please. Oh, this is the clicker. So cannabis is a very complex plant. It's over 400 chemical compounds, cannabinoids, flavonoids, terpenes, THC and CBD are two of the most well-known cannabinoids, but they interact with your body's endocannabinoid system, so a system that's already in your body. I know a lot of you are in the space, so you probably already know that. Terpenes are responsible for the smell and the taste of cannabis, so like limonene is from lemons, and apinene is from like pine. And so that's where you get the different smells and tastes. So the medical uses of cannabis are far and wide. There's more and more research being done as restrictions get lifted, but everything glaucoma, MS, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and then there's a lot of other things that there's anecdotal evidence and a lot more research is being done to find all of the benefits of this wonderful plant. And then there's a lot of other uses for cannabis, significant uses beyond just the medical. All aspects of the plant, from clothing to food to building materials, and they make hempcrete. I mean, they made a car out of hemp, and so it's pretty amazing what can be done with this ingredient. And now, where is it legal? Well, it's legal in 29 U.S. states and Canada medically, and then 8 U.S. states recreationally, and the Washington District of Columbia. But it's also medically legal in several countries, like Mexico, Germany, Colombia, Australia, Jamaica, and then Uruguay, it's fully recreationally legal. So this is a over $20 billion industry by 2020. The numbers, depending on where you look, may change a little bit, but last year they said about $7 billion, and this is legal sales of cannabis. So just think of what's going on in the black market and add that on top. So this is a huge industry that people have to be aware of, because it's impacting every industry. And the people have spoken. Over 60% are for legalization of cannabis. Now, I just want to provide a quick overview of the types of products for all of you that may not know. This is something that I've been doing, going out and educating those from corporations, people that don't use products. They're not aware of all the things that cannabis is integrated into. So you have your basic, your flower, your bud, and they can be put into pre-rolls and boxed nicely. So you're seeing this real evolution of product quality, packaging improvements, the proper dosing technology, which we'll hopefully hear about tonight from Humboldt, focus on organic. So it's becoming really impressive. If you go to a dispensary, the quality and the number of products are just so impressive. So you get all the different types of concentrates, and then those are you get your vape pens, and then you have your edibles, your topicals, your tinctures. But I mean, just the quality of the products is something you're going to find, and actually they are in a lot of stores like Erewhon and other retailers with CBD products, which is gray area. It's legal, it's not legal. They may talk about that a little bit later, but it's integrated in a lot of different products, beautifully crafted chocolates, mints, topicals. I've got my parents using cannabis, if I can say that. But again, it's an ingredient that can really be put into anything. And I'll quickly go into, cannabis has been part of mainstream media for decades. You get Reefer Madness and integrated into Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You get the stoner stereotypes. But finally, we're really showcasing the reality of this plant and what it can do with shows like Weeds and the behind-the-scenes look at what's going on in the dispensary world and the cannabis industry. And a lot more mainstream outlets are covering it. We have a very special guest tonight from Bon Appetit that will be joining our media panel. And so really looking forward to the conversation a little bit later. You also get celebrities. You get that they're all capitalizing on this industry as they should, from music moguls, actors, athletes. They're all finding their niches. Now, how does it impact you? Well, if you're not in the cannabis industry, it's going to impact you in some way. If you're in the advertising, marketing world, there's brands coming up in every type of industry that are focusing on cannabis, or even you're getting mainstream industries that are looking at the cannabis industry and seeing how they can take advantage of it. And so from the investment side to branding, data and analytics, media companies. So just wanted to quickly show you, for those who may not be aware, of all the different publications that are out there. I mean, this is from a consumer side. These are all the magazines. High Times, which is a staple in the cannabis community, Dope Magazine, Cannabis Now, and there's so many that are on in here. And then you also get the business side. MG Magazine, which is more business focused. I mean, even you get terpenes and testing, cannabis nurses. So there's these really niche audiences that are finding their home within this space. It's pretty impressive, especially when you go out to these conferences and you start meeting the diverse group of people that are out there. Kind of like today. I'm very impressed with the diversity of our group that's here, so thank you all for coming. It's good to see people from agencies to brands wanting to learn more, trying to get into the space. And then also some online companies. Woo. Then you get the mainstream brands that are trying to target the cannabis industry. So they're dipping their toe in it. Their board members may not know about it, but this was Totino's, so when you're getting them dipping their toe and putting this in Denver around 420, Drumstick did their Get Coned campaign. So they know this audience is extremely important to their bottom lines. The Munchies meal, is there, you want to go out and go back? Did you want to picture that? And you're seeing more and more of these mainstream brands that are doing this. They're targeting this cannabis consumer. They need to advertise on Mary Jane first, but they are trying to reach that cannabis consumer. Ben & Jerry's has always been a strong supporter of the cannabis industry. Taco Bell, there may be someone here from Taco Bell. Call me. T-Mobile had a Martha and Snoop commercial on, it was during the Super Bowl. That was huge. They had to get the NFL approval to actually run this commercial because it was insinuating cannabis. Pop Chips did a campaign with Ease where as Ease was doing their delivery service, they were delivering Pop Chips to all the patients. Very smart. So overall, I mean, the key takeaways for this, cannabis is one of the fastest growing industries, if not the fastest growing industries. Enormous diversity in product categories. It's still federally illegal, but accepted by the majority. So again, do your homework, understand the risks. It's a fragmented industry and legalization varies by states. So that's important to know. Mainstream brands are dipping their toes in the water, but conversation is happening in the mainstream. And agencies are being created to target cannabis industry. And that's especially for anyone in the agency world. So a lot of these companies are being developed just to target the cannabis industry. And so you need to be looking at what impact that may have on your bottom line. And then the cannabis industry is not going away. No matter what Trump may say, it's not going away. And so now we want to just jump into the meat and potatoes of the night. I want to call up our first panel. This is, we've got 3 people that are extremely well-versed in what's going on in the local community, the LA community with legalization efforts. So they're going to be able to provide insight into what are the laws? What can you do just as me as Jim or me as an advertiser or brand? So if you want to come up, we have Ruben, Ariel, and Evan. And they'll... I'll let Evan take it away.
Sit here.
It's a very big crowd for cannabis advertising and marketing, so excited to see this here in Santa Monica. So brief introduction, my name is Evan Eneman. I run a few businesses in the space, an investment firm called Casa Verde Capital, a professional services firm called Ello, and a creative agency called Flower Shop. So I look at this industry from a fairly broad perspective and landscape, given the intricacies of what's been happening over the last several years, or really decades, but really the last couple of years since 2012. And legalization is typically one of the most asked questions is, what is happening and what can we do and what can't we do? So we have a few people here to my left. Ruben Honig, Executive Director of the LA Cannabis Task Force and partner at Ceres Strategies. And then also Ariel Clark, founder and chairwoman of LA Cannabis Task Force and partner at Neubert, cannabis firm, law firm in LA. So we'll sort of kick this off with a little bit of the background that, Jim really gave an overview and a perspective of what cannabis is as a market. And I'll just give you some quick numbers here. So over 60% of US citizens support legalization. This is the most recent Gallup poll, the highest number that we've ever had. 94% would approve of allowing adults to use for medical purposes with a medical prescription. 73% oppose government enforcement where states have already legalized. And 76% support rescheduling or declassifying from the Controlled Substances Act. So, Jim put up some slides. 29 states are legal, plus Washington, D.C. And I think a more interesting number is 40 countries around the world have either legalized or decriminalized cannabis. So with that backdrop, why don't we start with what does the landscape look like right now? There is a discrepancy between federal law and state law, and we have a large portion of agency folks, media folks, brands, operators who are either interested in getting involved in the space or already in the space. Ariel, why don't we start with you? What's happening in California, the largest market in the world?
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. It's so nice to see everyone. So as Evan mentioned, my name is Ariel Clark. I have a law practice. We're a women-run law firm, and we've worked with cannabis businesses in California across all segments of the market really for the last 10 years. So We represent people who are growers and dispensary operators and manufacturers of various products, as well as work with other ancillary professional services and even advise media companies on how to work in this space responsibly. And I do a lot of political work on a local and state level as well. To situate ourselves really with where we're at in the state of California, I'd just like to add some numbers into the mix, because I think when we look at this industry and we see really how massive it is, especially in California, it's helpful to think about the fact that 49% of the entire national cannabis market in the United States is in California, and then of 30% of California's market is in LA. And as the 6th largest economy in the world, and really a very thriving, already existent cannabis industry here in California, we passed medical cannabis back in 1996, and as of January 1st, 2018, we will have legalized marijuana for sale at commercial cannabis businesses, ideally statewide. So in California, we're in this transition from really what's been a unregulated or self-regulated system where businesses have operated a little bit in a gray area, largely as a result of the lack of political will to regulate the industry until really 2016, when the state legislature stepped in and created a regulatory framework that, again, is about to come online January 1st, 2018. And that's kind of what's happening on a state level, is we're moving into a very regulated market. This is a very positive thing for all of these business operators, as well as for you folks who may be interested in working with people who are growing cannabis and maybe helping them develop very cool branding around their appellations, which the Department of Agriculture is going to let cannabis businesses create various sorts of appellations, which is really exciting. I mean, you know, I just want to say just a couple things about the fact that I'm talking with you guys. I remember it wasn't until about 3-4 years ago that I said to my clients, yeah, you know, I think it's okay to start getting involved in really marketing and branding your various products. Let's be careful about it. Let's make sure all of your legal structure is in place. But before that, and by the way, now still all of this is illegal federally, so that's something we have to always be mindful of. But certainly on a state level and with this kind of varied types of law enforcement activities, I didn't want a client to put any sort of demarcation or anything on their product that you could then trace that back to them, right? Because it's been a challenging, I could go ad nauseum about the challenges we've had to deal with in this industry, but it's been very challenging. Yet today, now with all of these statistics of the number of folks who support this, where this is at not just nationally but internationally, I'm so thrilled that all of your very creative, brilliant minds will be able to help our clients and all the ancillary services and businesses really bring their products to market and advertise in ways that make sense for whatever their business ethos is, and really kind of help move this ball forward. So anyway, it's super cool to be here.
Thank you for that. And so Ruben, you've spent a lot of time in the city of LA and really trying to help shape what the policy landscape looks like here with respect to the passage of the medical law back in 2016, or 2015 rather, and the adult use Prop 64 back in November of 2016. What does that look like now in the city of LA? Many of us live and work here. How do brands live and breathe in a thriving city like LA, and how can agencies and creatives and media companies help brands in the space right now?
Thanks, Evan. Hi everyone, my name is Ruben Honig. As Evan said, I'm the Executive Director of the LA Cannabis Task Force and partner at Cirrus Strategies. We are, along with our founder, Ariel Clark, with the task force, a political advocacy organization in the city of Los Angeles. But I moved here 3 years ago as a medical cannabis patient. I was living in another state where I didn't have safe access to cannabis, and I had an autoimmune disorder for 17 years, and I actually moved out to Los Angeles as what they call a medical cannabis refugee. I always feel it's funny saying that, but I was a small business owner, a cultivator, and manufacturer, but it was actually the political advocacy work that really drew me. And Ariel was my attorney originally, and what drew my attention because in the city of Los Angeles, you have the, what most and everyone says is the largest market, the largest consumer, and probably, business market in the world, yet this entire industry is illegal, except for a small subset of dispensaries that are recognized as being legal. So that is a very, very difficult climate for businesses to operate. It's very difficult for people to kind of peek their heads out of a hole and to brand their businesses. But we're moving in a new direction with the passage of the medical program, with the passage of Prop 64 in November, and now actually we're waiting on regulations from the state because they're actually combining the two programs. It's funny, it was McCursa and Alma, now it's called MauCursa, so they put them together. And so we're waiting for those regulations, but
They didn't have the right agency working with them on that, by the way.
well, I said McAlma, but they yeah, so we're in a very interesting time because, as now we're starting to get clarity from the city of Los Angeles, we're getting more and more clarity from the state, we're getting more clarity from different cities as what the regulations are going to look like and giving businesses opportunities. When I say businesses, I mean not the ancillary businesses, but the actual operators, the cultivators, the manufacturers, the testing labs, the delivery services, the distributors, and there's other people, but you get it. The dispensaries, obviously, which is the forward-facing part of the industry. Now there are, we're getting closer to people being actually treated like legitimate business people actually being treated like not criminals anymore, but there's a curve and there's a learning curve, and we're moving towards that, but as we're getting closer, it's also, maybe the gray area is getting a little grayer, and there are, powers that be, and there are governments that kind of still have prohibitionist attitudes, and obviously this is going to take time, and this is going to take time to change, but why this is so important is, as companies are peaking out, I know it's easier for, people in the ancillary business to participate because they're not under, city, state, and, possible, at the worst case, federal prosecution. But, at the same time, now you're going to see, amazing brands, amazing innovation, people that have been doing it but haven't been allowed to do it legally. So now in California, as Ariel said, with there's amazing regions in California that are very specific to growing. There are amazing manufacturers and brands and even dispensaries that have their amazing brands in the city of Los Angeles. So now we're moving to a place where expertise not only in not just creativity, but where marketers and advertisers hopefully can participate. I want to add a little caveat to that because there is some energy on the state level to restricting advertising and marketing, and there's a lot of energy in the city of Los Angeles to restricting that. So it's really important to keep your pulse on what's going on politically because that's going to inform you of what you're allowed to do as a business. But now it's, as many people said, when there's going to be so many businesses and in such a massive market coming online, it's the brands that are really going to survive. Those with the best branding, those with again, so, I wouldn't say stay tuned, but really keep your pulse on what's going on politically, really understand what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And, now's a really time that if you're dipping your toe in, you're getting really close to going full throttle.
Thank you for that. So this all kind of started back in 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act and was probably one of the best advertising campaigns or misinformation campaigns that we've seen in a long time. And we have the brilliant minds in the room here, and there's really two things that we need to try and address from a legalization standpoint or decriminalization standpoint. And that is, how do we reverse 90 years of misinformation when we have laws that don't allow us to actually do that? So how, as people are helping to shape policy and advocate on behalf of the industry, what challenges do you see ahead for changing that sentiment? Even though we've talked about the numbers, the sentiment is there, but you have some restrictions around advertising on products themselves specifically, not just in California, but state to state. And then you also are fighting this battle to push forward reform and legalization. So for you and your efforts around that, both in Los Angeles and in the state, what are some of the things that you're seeing and that creatives and agencies can really help spread the message for both legalization and for advocacy, on behalf of brands themselves?
It is clear that the way that you present your brand to yourself or yourself as an individual, that matters a lot. That became clear when starting to get very involved in political advocacy, and that was a major component of our strategy with the LA Cannabis Task Force. What kind of message do we want to send from our little branding to kind of how we present ourselves, right? So I certainly would really encourage and ask all of you who are interested in moving this ball forward from a political perspective. There are a number of different advocacy agencies or organizations, both on a local, state, and federal and international level. Organizations like Drug Policy Alliance. You've got statewide cannabis organizations and other organizations that are looking at these issues and really do need some good branding, marketing, advertising, informational strategy from folks like yourselves to really kind of help educate and help frame these issues in a way that I think will be most helpful to the underlying causes themselves.
Yeah, please.
I think that, to what you asked and what you spoke about, Evan, I think that as the largest market in the world, and I'm not going to say that it hasn't been, there hasn't been a lack of coverage, but I think that as we're getting closer to, the California coming online, we're getting closer to, obviously a tipping point nationally. It's really important, I think, to focus not just on California, but I think to tell the story of Los Angeles as we're looking to regulate the largest market. And the individual stories in this city are amazing. When you get into the businesses, when you get into the people, when you get into the patients, to tell those stories, it's, from a media perspective, I think there's so much content out there that people aren't really taking advantage of. So I guess that would be my advice, to look into that. And as well, yeah, from a branding perspective, again, there's great brands. They're not just brands, but there's great people with doing great things, but there is a great story behind there. So it's melding the two of those together, and I think that's really going to be a great way for everyone to provide, or for media partners to provide content out there that really could be pushed nationally. The story's going to get really big, really fast.
And if I can just speak to what those advertising restrictions are that we're talking about. So in California, and we have a similar sort of local motion pending in LA, there are going to be restrictions on advertising in the following ways. First, you can't create any advertising or branding or marketing that is targeted toward children. That seems pretty obvious. There are some efforts on a state level as well to limit what is the Senate bill that came out? To limit product labeling, sorry guys, to limit product labeling on any sort of merchandise and other clothing accessories in terms of the actual logo. But then there could be a carve out for putting the company name on that. There are some other limits in terms of, can you put these signs on interstate freeways, and where you can actually advertise, who can access that. If it's going to be on television or something like that, a certain percentage, I think it's 71.6% of the viewership needs to be over the age of 21, and there are a number of other restrictions. But I think, from my perspective as an attorney, as someone who cares very much about the professionalization of this industry and really sees the opportunity for the legitimization of both the medical and adult use where appropriate market, really being thoughtful about the opportunities to help really help with that professionalization, help with the information to the users, whether it be medical or adult use patients, and really remember that, we are on the forefront of creating this industry. So of course, doing it in a way that is responsible to the greater community, whatever it may be, because the truth is cannabis touches so much. I mean, it touches the environment, it touches health and welfare. You've got just so many aspects of our lives that cannabis, hemp, and this newly emerging industry touches. So just to add that.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, and I think you've both touched upon a few points there that I think would be really important to note. Cannabis right now, we look at legalization, is actually being grouped in as a vice, and in some ways it absolutely is, and in many ways it's not a vice at all. And I think it's interesting that the parameters with which anyone can advertise is actually more restrict than any other vice or really any other industry collectively. What's your perspective on the easing of some of those, what people might call draconian laws around advertising in the space, whether that's in California or in markets around the US or even internationally?
Time?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this whole thing internationally and certainly in California and in my lifetime has been a process of education. I mean, if you look at this on a really meta level, we are changing our attitude toward marijuana, toward the war on drugs, toward criminalization. I mean, like internationally. And so a lot of this will be education, political work, legal, time, education, normalization, education.
Dealing with regulators on a state level, dealing with, many city councils from, in Los Angeles and, again, the massive city, and then you have other smaller cities, but it's really, it's education of leadership, it's education of people, it's the messaging that people at the top and people that are influencers are putting out there, and it's, cannabis, for me was medicine, for many people is, and continues to be medicine, and it's why they're alive and why they continue or are able to do what they do and why they've been able to survive. But it's also as a lifestyle choice. I'm not here to compare alcohol versus cannabis or tobacco versus cannabis, but cannabis seems to me like it's a lesser vice out of all of them. And ultimately, when you want to talk about recreational versus medical, what if someone has a drink after work, or somebody has an edible, or somebody smokes after work? What is that? Stress relief? Is that medical? Is it recreational? It's very confusing. So I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately, or I think this is just the nature of people in general, and this is the nature of culture and society. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take, if we like it or not, in the largest market, in California, it's going to take a lot of time to figure out these regulations and get it, smoothly running. And, even from the political standpoint, we're talking about how long is it going to take for businesses to be treated like legitimate business people versus being treated like criminals. I mean, for people that are embedded in the industry, it's obvious, right? It's obvious that, these are business people, but Ariel, deals with clients every day. I deal with clients every day and members every day. Evan deals with many people in the industry every day, and these people are scared. They're petrified. They're being messed with. They don't want to be public about what they do, and I'm hoping that we get there sooner than later. But it's all of us participating in the process, and the media really pushing out that message and having really responsible messaging and content out there that's going to really push this process forward.
So one aspect that I think is also very pertinent to this group, advertising and marketing spend in the cannabis industry is actually not a business write-off. So you're not going to see the very large budgets from brands because this is something they can write off as part of their business expense. This is something that really takes away from their bottom line today in a way that they don't get the tax benefit of. So that's something from a legalization standpoint, just a reformation of IRS tax code, that's still a significant impact. And obviously that will affect what brands will be able to spend on advertising because they don't have those general business benefits. So you brought up a couple things, and we saw some of the billboards before. We're starting to see the shift from this very traditional, endemic, stoner stereotype campaign elements and design and brand elements to what some might say are more sophisticated brands or sophisticated messaging or just better design overall. Do you see that helping push legalization forward? And you talked about storytelling. Is part of what we as a group here need to do is actually tell the stories behind the patients or the consumers and the advocates and what this industry really is all about. Will that help to foster change from a legalization standpoint? Is that better for the industry? And how can we empower some of the people in this room to help us with that?
I would say it's absolutely better for the industry, but it's also better for you all who would like to court the industry. As Ruben mentioned, this is an industry that has been quasi-legal and, has been around. We have clients who are third-generation growers. This has been around. We are a thriving industry. We are here. And there's a lot of trust that you can actually reach out and build with potential clients to work with. And you're going to have to probably really understand, as Jim said at the beginning, I thought that was very well said, understand this industry, really kind of get into it. I talk with not just clients who want to be operators, but any ancillary professional, even media companies that come to us and ask us to help evaluate content or whatever it is. You need to know this industry, this market, and really get out there and listen and learn from who we are and kind of what our values are and where we're trying to go, and you really will be able to more than likely develop very long-term clients and relationships, and there is that big opportunity.
It's funny, I had so when I had an edibles brand, it was called Garden of Whedon, and it was a medicated dried fruit company. And I remember somebody once asked me, they said, what was the name of your edibles brand and what did you do? I said, Garden of Whedon. And he looked at me and he said, that's such a Gen 1 name. And I was like, so the point to that story is that it is moving to a more sophisticated, not that I didn't think it was sophisticated, I loved my brand. And other people loved it too, but thank you. It is moving to a more sophisticated message. You're seeing, and there's nothing against cannabis cups. There's nothing against, it's the events that are coming online. It's the demographic that are targeting. Listen, there's room for everybody, but the question is that what stories are you telling, and in what perspective are you telling it from? You can go to I would say a cannabis cup and tell a really shitty story about it. You could say, oh, it's the underside of the industry, but at the same time, you could tell an amazing story about it. At the same time, it's the perspective and it's through which lens you look at it from. And again, there's differences. Also, I think it's important to understand that there's differences between Southern California and Northern California and kind of the culture and the environment. I honestly haven't been to many events in Northern California, but I was at an event recently that is billed as a more Northern California event, the Emerald Exchange, but it has, more of a relaxed kind of outdoorsy vibe. You have this kind of outdoor grower mentality to it, and then the Southern California vibe is more of like these secret sessions. There's a lot. It's very heavy on the concentrates, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's concentrates at the Emerald Exchange and there's concentrates at a sesh or a cannabis cup, but they're presented completely differently. One is not worse than the other. To get back to your question, Evan, it's that it's going to take time. Still, it's very hard to say, but I keep focusing on this over and over again. It's the stories that people are telling, and as you tell more sophisticated stories, then we're going to be able to move the conversation forward. I think that is paramount to moving the whole thing forward.
And I was just going to say, more and more, we're seeing clients who are targeting certain communities, whether it be the soccer mom community, elder women, or whomever it may be. So it's, there is a huge, vast population that, presenting products to, presenting, various aspects of the cannabis industry. That also obviously helps normalize the industry for we who are political and legal advocates.
And just as public consumption comes online, it's eventually going to come online in Los Angeles, but I was in a city council meeting in West Hollywood, and they're, very, very progressive, and it's a smaller city, but they're really taking a hard look at public consumption. How are we going to do it? Are we going to have bars? Are we going to have lounges? They're going to have a dispensary in the Standard Hotel, possibly. They're doing things that are going to move that conversation forward. And then on the other side, there are things that they are not vilifying, but they're looking at it differently. So time, but I think public consumption and it normalizing is going to be a big part of that conversation.
So what do you guys see as the legal landscape, and how can people that represent agencies and brands as their clients, and also media participants, how can they support today? And I know I've asked this question before, but you talked about a lot of legal challenges and barriers around what you can and can't do for brands. But given what they can do right now, what are ways that agencies can get involved what are the hurdles that you guys would help them and advise them on with respect to entering the space, or providing some guidance to their non-endemic clients who want to target the audience that you have in some of the traditional cannabis media brands or cannabis audiences?
Well, I think it kind of depends on what the agency is trying to accomplish. So I think there are a number of things. If you're looking to work with business operators, growers, dispensaries, et cetera, there are some ways that I would recommend, some things to think about in terms of how you can advertise, what the types of advertisements you can put forward. As I was mentioning, not targeting to people who are under the age of 21 and some other things. So, those are certainly things that we would, talk with people about. When it comes to getting involved more so with this industry, again, I think there's a huge opportunity to go to some of these industry group association meetings, and just honestly, you'll meet the people who are the owners of these businesses. I mean, it will never be the case, probably for the next quite a while, that you will be in the midst of an emerging industry, and in the center, the epicenter of it, which is LA. I strongly encourage doing that and making relationships, and then, just being up on what the laws are, and what the laws are honestly on a state level, and there's some, federal things to be concerned with. I mean, it's hard as a lawyer to answer some of these questions because I am, it depends on the particular situation and what the project is and kind of what you want to do. But those are all things that honestly you guys need to think about, hiring cannabis-specific expertise. We sit in a room with like 8 other lawyers on some projects. It sounds crazy, but it's true. Things have to be thought through from the level of, are there going to be issues with receiving money, cash from these cannabis businesses? Are we contributing to money laundering? Honestly, I don't even want to go there. That's its own can of worms. So, just also, there's so much on the horizon. It's a lot of this, I would just very heavily recommend, get some good information about what you can and cannot do, run whatever your kind of proposal is a next move in this space by people who know where there are potential issues, because many of us have walked in the front of this, and better to learn from us and better to not kind of trip, ideally.
I think that as you work with other brands, and in doing that, develop your own brand, it's important to, and this might be obvious, but it's don't just look at this industry through the eyes of money and cash and gain. It's important to also think about, when you're structuring your businesses and thinking about your own personal brands, to give back, to give back to the community, to support political organizations, to again tell stories and develop that content. It not only will be great to drive, and this is for media sites, this is to drive traffic to them, but as well to push forward a cause. Pay attention to what's going on politically. Without this political movement, it's going to be very difficult for you guys to do what you do. And there might be times when you guys have to get politically involved, when they're going to be pushing back on advertising against you guys, or when there might be political things that are very specific and focused to you. But if you give back to the operators in the industry, the operators are going to remember that. And if you just go to operators and it's, again, from being in a shadow industry for so long, it's distrustful by nature. So you really need to, and you not just give back, but you can kind of smell it from a mile away, if that makes sense. So
the last boring part on that is, we're operating in a multi-jurisdictional environment. So if we're representing brands and creating campaigns, we really need to think about, where are those campaigns going to live, what states they operate in, or where they want to spread their messaging, what countries they operate in. And I think also importantly, within a state, what municipalities you're looking to operate in as well, because that is different. So having a flexible framework for that as you're looking to work with brands in the space. So with that, I just want to thank Ariel and Ruben for your thoughts on the landscape, and hopefully this was informative for you guys.
Thanks everybody for coming out.